Relational disappointment is rarely named, yet it sits at the centre of many people's experience of loneliness. It's not simply the absence of people nor a lack of opportunity to connect. It's the accumulation of moments, subtle or significant, where connection was expected, hoped for or needed, and it didn't arrive in the way the mind anticipated. Over time, these moments, they begin to shape perception, behaviour and ultimately identity. What starts as disappointment becomes a pattern, and that pattern often looks on the surface like chronic loneliness or social disconnection or a persistent sense of isolation. What relational disappointment actually is at its core is a mismatch between expectation and experience in human connection. This might include not feeling understood when you try to express something meaningful, or feeling emotionally unseen in relationships that appear fine, or reaching out and receiving neutral or inconsistent responses. Now, importantly, these experiences, they don't tend to be dramatic or traumatic. In fact, the most influential forms are often repeated, they're subtle, they're ambiguous. It's a conversation that falls flat, a moment of vulnerability that isn't met, or a sense that you're present but you're not truly felt. Now, individually, these moments seem minor, but collectively they begin to teach the mind something very different. Connection is uncertain. Don't rely on it too much. The mind is built to adapt. When something repeatedly causes discomfort, it doesn't keep approaching it in the same way. It adjusts. In relational disappointment, this adjustment is often protective. Instead of fully expressing, fully engaging, or fully relying on connection, the mind begins to moderate involvement, which can show up as holding back thoughts or emotions, or staying slightly guarded in conversations, or maintaining independence to reduce reliance on others. Crucially, these shifts are not usually conscious decisions. They are automatic calibrations designed to reduce the risk of further disappointment. And they work initially. You feel more controlled, less exposed, less dependent. But there is a cost. Loneliness in this context is not simply about being alone. It's about not experiencing the depth of connection that the mind is wired to seek. When protective patterns limit openness and presence, then connection becomes restricted. You might still socialize, maintain relationships, and engage in conversations, but something feels incomplete. And this leads to a very specific type of loneliness. Being with people, yet feeling separate, speaking but not feeling understood, engaging but not feeling emotionally connected. And over time, this creates a feedback loop. You feel disconnected, you protect yourself more. Connection reduces further and loneliness increases. Social disconnection often emerges as a secondary effect. As relational disappointment accumulates, the mind may begin to lower expectations of others, or assume interactions will lack depth, or anticipate subtle forms of disconnection. Now, this anticipation influences behaviour. You may find yourself avoiding conversations, withdrawing slightly in group settings, or prioritising solitude over uncertain interaction. Again, this is not laziness or a lack of social skill. It's a predictive adaptation. If the mind expects limited reward from connection, it conserves energy by reducing engagement. However, this does reinforce isolation. Isolation is often misunderstood as simply being physically alone, but many people feel alone even when they're around other people. In relational disappointment, isolation becomes internal. It's the sense that others don't fully understand you, and that expressing yourself won't change that, so connection feels effortful or unreliable. This creates a subtle but persistent separation between you and others, not because connection isn't possible, but because the system is no longer fully orientated towards it. One of the defining features of relational disappointment is that it operates below conscious awareness, which people often describe as "I don't know why I feel like this," or "nothing is obviously wrong," or "I just can't seem to connect properly." This is because the pattern isn't driven by a single belief or event. It's maintained by accumulated experiences, reinforced expectations, and automatic protective responses. The mind isn't trying to create loneliness, it's trying to prevent further disappointment. But in doing so, it limits the very thing that would resolve the feeling. Understanding relational disappointment changes the frame entirely. Instead of "I'm bad at relationships," I'm just a lonely person, or I can't connect like others do. The experience becomes my mind has adapted to repeated relational outcomes, and those adaptations are now shaping how I experience connection. Now, this shift is important because it moves the issue from identity to pattern, and patterns, by definition, can be changed. Resolving loneliness rooted in relational disappointment is not about forcing more social interaction or learning surface level communication techniques. Those approaches, they often fail because they don't address the underlying mechanisms. The shift begins with recognizing protective patterns in real time. Notice where expression is being filtered or reduced, and becoming aware of subtle withdrawal or disengagement. From there, change is introduced gradually, not through dramatic behavioural shifts, but through incremental increases in authenticity and presence. For example, allowing slightly more honest responses in conversation, or staying engaged a little longer when the urge is to withdraw, or expressing thoughts without over-editing. Now, these changes may appear small, but they directly counter the protective pattern, and importantly, they begin to generate new relational experiences. As the pattern softens, then something shifts. Connections start to feel less effortful, less calculated, more responsive. And that's not because other people have changed, but because your level of presence has increased. The mind begins to update its internal model. Connection is possible. It doesn't always lead to disappointment. This reduces the need for protection. And as protection decreases, then connection expands. Relational disappointment is not a flaw, it's an adaptation. It reflects a system that has learned from experience and adjusted accordingly. However, when that adjustment becomes fixed, it can lead to persistent loneliness, social disconnection, or internal isolation. The key is not to remove the system, but to update it, because once the mind no longer expects disappointment as the default outcome, it no longer needs to protect itself in the same way. And in that shift, connection stops feeling uncertain, and it starts becoming something you can reliably experience again.